Hi, have you ever heard people use the terms applied theatre and social theatre as if they're identical? You're not alone. Students get confused, practitioners get confused, even academics sometimes talk past each other because the two terms overlap heavily. They also do different jobs. So, this is a field guide with a respectful, myth busting edge. I'm going to define each term clearly and fairly, adding an extra layer to each that helps explain why the words travel the way that they do. Then I'll show three common maps of their relationship and finish with examples, crossovers, and a practical takeaway you can use in your study or in practice. One ground rule up front: neither label guarantees ethical practice, artistry, or impact. You can do applied theatre well or badly. You can do social theatre well or badly. The terms help us describe work. They don't do the work for us. Let's start with applied theatre. In a lot of academic and training contexts, applied theatre is used as an umbrella term for theatre and drama practices used in educational, community, and therapeutic contexts, often outside conventional theatre buildings and often with participants who are not professional performers. So, applied theatre tends to be defined by deployment, where it happens, who it's for, what it's trying to do. This can include theatre in education, prison theatre, community theatre, theatre for development, work in health and care settings, and drama-based training. A short, neutral summary could be that applied theatre is theatre and drama understood through application, context, purpose, and use. Now, here's an extra layer that helps explain why applied theatre is so recognisable as a term. Applied theatre is also a naming move inside higher education and research. The label gained traction as a way to gather a wide range of practices into a field you can teach, study, and build research methods around. Some writers describe the term as relatively new, pulling together diverse practices that previously lived under many different names. There's also research from the UK noting that applied theatre started being used in UK academia, partly because older umbrellas like community theatre didn't always fit what people were actually doing. This matters because it explains something simple. Applied theatre is not only a set of methods, it's also a way the field became legible to universities, degrees, curricula, and research. Moving to social theatre. Social theatre is often defined less by where it happens and more by the social philosophy driving it. The centre of gravity shifts to questions like what social relationships are being created or repaired, who holds authorship, what kind of participation is real, who is accountable to whom, and what kind of social life the work is building. Social theatre often foregrounds the practitioner as facilitator, and it treats the process itself as socially meaningful, not merely as a route to a product. So, a short, neutral summary could be: social theatre is theatre understood through social relation, ethics, participation, authorship, and community life. The extra layer for social theatre includes Italian vocabulary, which may be able to clarify things a little further. In Italy, you'll often hear teatro sociale and also teatro sociale di comunità. A useful articulation of this comes from Claudio Bernardi, who describes social theatre as a liminal and performative activity made by and with people, groups and communities, often in situations connected to training, care or distress, with a focus on well-being and the reduction of suffering. The important point is not that Italy owns social theatre, it's that Italian scholarship has offered a very clear language for a particular emphasis. Theatre as a social, participatory practice that sits close to education, care, inclusion, and community life. So, now we've done something symmetrical. Applied theatre has an academic naming layer that explains its widespread institutional recognisability. Social theatre has an Italian vocabulary there that explains a particularly influential articulation of its ethical and participatory centre. Let's talk a little bit more about some misconceptions that arguably create most of the confusion. Myth 1. Applied theatre is the theory and social theatre is the action. It's catchy, but it doesn't hold. Applied theatre is often intensely practical and judged on what happens in real settings. Social theatre has serious theory and its own conceptual debates. Both terms describe practice plus thinking. They're not theory versus action. Myth 2. Social theatre means political theatre and applied theatre means educational theatre. Sometimes, but not always. Social theatre can be about care, belonging and inclusion, not only activism. Applied theatre can be explicitly political, especially when it confronts power, voice and inequality. Myth 3. If it's participatory, it must be social theatre. Participation alone is not the full story. The quality of participation matters. Who sets the agenda? Who authors meaning? Who benefits? Who carries the consequences? And one more myth that hides in plain sight. Myth 4. The label tells you the ethics. It doesn't. Ethics live in choices, facilitation, consent, power, risk, care, representation, and aftercare. Okay? Good. Let's explore 3 maps of the relationship between the two. I'm using all 3 because different maps help different audiences, and none of them needs to be treated as the one true answer. Map A. Social theatre sits inside applied theatre. Applied theatre is the umbrella category and social theatre is one cluster inside it, especially where the work foregrounds participation, community authorship, inclusion and care. This mapping often appears in university contexts where applied theatre is the most established label for the overall field. Map B. Applied theatre sits inside social theatre. Here, social theatre becomes the wider philosophical container, theatre as social practice, and applied theatre is one operational lane within it, especially the more programme-based and context-defined work. This mapping often appears in practitioner spaces where the ethical stance is treated as the primary frame. Or Map C. They overlap. like a Venn diagram. Some work is clearly applied theatre, but not social theatre. Some is clearly social theatre, but not applied theatre. A lot sits in the overlap and can honestly be described as both. For mixed audiences, Map C is usually the most useful because it explains why disagreement persists without implying anyone is ignorant or acting in bad faith. A quick clarification. When we mention Italian terms or UK academic uptake, we're talking about where certain labels and vocabularies became influential, not who owns socially engaged theatre practice. The practices are global, and so are the influences. Now, let's make this concrete with clean examples. These are deliberately simple so the boundaries are visible. 2 examples of applied theatre that aren't necessarily social theatre. Example 1. Corporate role-play training with no social agenda. Drama techniques are applied to train customer service scripts, leadership behaviours or sales conversations. It is theatre deployed in a non-theatre setting for a practical goal, so it fits many applied theatre definitions. But if it's not grounded in community accountability, shared authorship, or social repair, many would hesitate to call it social theatre in the sense that we're using here. Example 2. Museum or heritage interpretation, that is, education to an audience. Actors animate a historical site or museum gallery. Again, theatre is being applied outside conventional theatre for a clear purpose. But it may not be social theatre if there's little co-authorship, little sustained relationship with the community, and social relation is not the primary artwork. Now, 2 examples of social theatre that aren't necessarily applied theatre. Example 1. Socially engaged theatre inside a conventional theatre building. You can have a production with deep social accountability and community co-authorship presented in a mainstream theatre venue. If someone defines applied theatre mainly by working outside theatre institutions, they may exclude in-theatre work from the applied theatre label, even though the work is clearly social theatre in stance. Example 2. A grassroots street performance as civic ritual or solidarity practice. A protest carnival, a memorial procession, a neighbourhood-made event where belonging and collective identity are the core function. It can be social theatre because the social relation is the work itself, yet it may not be framed as an applied programme with externally defined objectives. Now, let's look at the overlaps where things get genuinely interesting and where the labels often become less helpful than a clear description. Take theatre in education. In some cases, it can be a delivered educational product, closer to the applied theatre framing. In other cases, it can be a long-term partnership with real co-authorship where the social process is central, and then it starts to look like both. Or take theatre in prisons, health settings, refugee contexts, or community development. The same method can slide along a spectrum depending on authorship, ethics, and accountability. There are many writers and researchers on the subject. Let's mention a few. James Thompson, Richard Schechner. They are both useful because they explicitly ask why the term social theatre matters, framing it as a dynamic meeting between theatre and social work, with the potential to change both disciplines. Electra Salikas, in her chapter titled Social Theatre, an exercise in trusting the art. This is useful because she warns against reducing social theatre into mere delivery or explanation. It's a provocation to keep the art alive, not turn theatre into a blunt instrument. Guli Shanina, in a chapter with the memorable title, Like Ham in a Temperance Hotel, pushes into the difficult borderlands of healing, participation and education, where theatre, therapy and social intervention can easily blur. He's useful precisely because he forces careful thinking about boundaries and claims. Michael Balfour. Balfour is essential because he challenges grand narratives of transformation. His argument about a theatre of little changes is a practical corrective. Be precise about intention, modest about claims, and honest about power, commissioning pressures and what change can realistically look like. And notice what that list does. It doesn't crown a winner. It gives us a set of cautions and commitments that apply across both social and applied theatre. Here's the simplest way that I know to end the terminology argument without flattening complexity. When you describe any project, answer 4 questions in 1 or 2 sentences. What is the setting and purpose? Who holds authorship? What kind of participation is real? What change is being claimed? And how modest or bold is that claim? If you emphasize setting and purpose, you'll sound like applied theatre. If you emphasize authorship and participation, you'll sound like social theatre. If you can do both clearly, you're probably in the overlap, which is where a lot of the strongest work lives. So, applied theatre and social theatre are not enemies, and they're not clones. Applied theatre helps us talk about theatre in relation to context, purpose, and use, and it's widely established in academic umbrellas. Social theatre helps us talk about theatre in relation to ethics, participation, authorship, and the social life the work creates. Pick the map that helps your audience. Name your definitions early, then do the work. If you found this video useful, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel below. This will help us to continue to provide more free resources and videos like this one. Thank you. What works? Action works.